Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time out today. We are so delighted to be with you today to share a little bit about what we know at Smallbox to make your lives a little easier, your websites more student-friendly, and ultimately your community colleges more successful. I'm Meg Lithick, and I'm joined today by Eugene Ernsberger. We're part of the Indianapolis-based design agency Smallbox. Prior to our roles here, we've had nearly 40 years of combined experience in digital strategy. Eugene in the agency space, as well as an adjunct instructor for IUPUI, and I in the nonprofit field, and most recently in higher ed as the director of brand engagement at Butler University. In the next hour and a half, we're going to move quickly through a design process that we use to untangle fuzzy problems, prioritize solutions, and ultimately better serve the individuals who are at the center of our work. For you all, designing a more student-centered website isn't just about conversions or profit margins. It's about connecting your audiences, your students, with the knowledge and opportunities that could truly change their lives and the lives of their family members. That's really, really important work. And our hope today is that we're going to make it a bit easier for you. A few housekeeping notes before we dive in. We have created some templates that we will reference along the way. It's something we're calling the Student-Centered Starter Kit. That kit will provide really practical tools that will help you immediately implement what you hear today. So stay tuned at the end when we'll point you to the website where you can find those tools to get you and your teams going. We'll also have about 20 minutes at the end of the workshop to answer any questions that you may have, but please feel free to add your questions to the comments along the way. Those will be private, but we will be collecting them and compiling them as we go along. And then after the second workshop, which we'll talk about later, we're actually going to compile a list of frequently asked questions from these webinars, from these workshops, and we'll provide answers to those FAQs that you'll find on the website and the starter kit as well. Another thing that I'll state now, and we will continue to underscore this along the way, is that this is a process that can be used at any scale, no matter your budget or your staff size. It can be tailored to whatever you need it to be. Whether you are a team of one, and I've seen some people say that they're a team of half a person, or a team of 12, whether you have a tiny budget or are facing a new website design with a large budget, whether you do the work in-house or with a vendor, these student-centered practices will provide the insights you need to prioritize and allocate resources to build a better experience for your students. So let's start at the most basic question and build from there. What's the purpose of a community college website? Why do we care so much about it?
Thank you, Meg. A study done in 2019 by the education think tank EAB found that college websites are the #1 source of information for prospective students. It's where they go to investigate opportunities, explore alignment, and seek information that will inform their decisions. But we all know that creating and maintaining a successful website is very complicated. For the vast majority of our college websites, they need to be all things to all people, and we often prioritize the needs and assumptions of the college first. The website has to deliver vital information, program requirements, course schedules, maps and directions, information about student life, information about faculty, information about financial aid, COVID protocols. The list goes on and on. On top of that, the website has to convey the community college's unique brand and mission. Then it has to compel current and prospective students to action and provide paths to complete those actions, like scheduling a tour, requesting more information, and one day maybe even applying. There's a lot to consider, and it can become a jumbled mess of priorities, pathways, and people. And then you add to the fact that some of our biggest challenges are the fact that we have limited resources, small staff, and a lack of organizational alignment. We have competing priorities between departments and a lack of mutually agreed upon metrics of success. It can sometimes feel very overwhelming and untenable with all these factors at play. So as a result, we feel paralyzed or maybe only able to make quick fixes that service the short-term needs of the college. But if we really think about the impact of a messy website for our core users, we know we need to change. It not only negatively affects the folks coming to our site, but ultimately it can hurt the bottom line if we can't build engagement and trust. Our efforts to grow enrollment and retain our current students becomes extremely challenged. Some interesting statistics here, 80% of users are less likely to return to a website due to a bad experience. And the vast majority of perceptions of the credibility and quality of our institutions are based on the website's look and feel. Also critically, and I don't have exact data on this because Google and other search engines are notoriously opaque about how it all works, but we know that improved user experience can boost your SEO by reducing bounce rate, maximizing user pathways, optimizing accessibility, and highlighting key content that users are using to search. We can move our website to rank more highly in organic search results. So to sum up, small calibrations to improving your students and prospective students' experience on your website can have an enormously positive ripple effect.
Building a student-centered website provides clear benefits to prospective and current students, like being able to easily find what they need, feeling welcome and considered, and ultimately building comfort and trust. So hopefully you hear quotes like these, which these ultimately lead to key benefits for your college, including higher application rates, improved student retention, better SEO, and more site traffic as a result, and the reduction of redesigns and redevelopment costs associated with the site. By focusing on your student experience, we can not only increase profits, but also generate savings, both helping the bottom line, which we know is critical in community colleges. By returning focus to the people that benefit from the service we provide, real people with real needs, we can begin to more easily and effectively prioritize and use our limited resources to create better experiences and better outcomes. We know that the individuals pursuing an education at community colleges are diverse and have really complex motivations and needs. When we think of our users as a big group of strangers, that all feels muddy. But when we think of them as Rachel and Fiona and David and Ronald, things start to come into focus.
So what do we mean by being student-centered? First, I want to highlight a few key differences. What is unique about this compared to a traditional model? So in a traditional model, we often orient our efforts around the organization's needs first. Goals are important. Metrics and measuring success is vital. But by shifting our perspective to the actual needs and experiences of the folks looking for our services, it can have a domino effect throughout the entire approach to our work. So in a traditional model, we might think, how can we get more prospective students to apply, and how do we increase web traffic? Very metrics focused. And we might think about our content in terms of what we want prospective students to know. When we shift over to student-centered, we think more about what's the best way to help students determine whether we are the right fit for them. More so thinking about their experience and the problem that they're facing and trying to solve. How do we deliver content that is useful to prospective students, and how do we highlight what prospective students want to know? We've also compiled a few practical examples of some things we found in the wild that demonstrate some results from student-centered thinking. Now, these are not endorsements of any particular solution. They're more so just an acknowledgement that we can see how these clearly started with a student-centered, with the student experience at the center. So in this example, this university or this college has chosen to provide a guide at the outset. So an interstitial or an experience that interrupts the flow to give someone an opportunity to choose the door that they want to enter through. Here we have very direct pathways to content based on high-level needs, and then also by audience groups. This example goes even further and provides a wizard-style approach. It's a interface. It's a step-by-step tool that helps students find ideal programs based on their personal interests and their ambitions.
What's really interesting about this one is it's not pushing majors and minors and programs on people, but it's letting them identify. That's terminology that a college would use. It's using the way that students might think about how they want to pursue study and a career one day.
Yes, and this last example here is they took a mega menu approach, which it opens this drop-down menu that emphasizes pathways to content, again, based off of audience goals. And then it's supported by topical categories that their programs fall into. So again, like Meg said with the last example, it's thinking about it more from the student's perspective and what is the problem they're trying to solve and how would they actually think about the programs available. They don't need an exhaustive list as much as they need to match it to the terminology that they would use for their interests.
And speaking of terminology, one of the interesting factors about all of those examples is that they start to frame things through the voice of the student. So I'm looking for, I want to. And so it's just as easy as a language change, a content change that could be done. But those are, the possibilities and the scale of what could happen if you become more student-centered. So whether you're a team of 1, again, or a team of 12, whether your website's old or new, and whether it's built in-house or on a CMS like Modern Campus, we are going to walk you through some powerful methods and tools today that we know will enable you to create more meaningful experiences for your users, for your students, while also collecting data and insights that will empower you to make a strong case for your decision-making and budget allocation. I come from higher ed. I know you got to make those cases for your decisions and budgets in particular. Today, Eugene and I are going to walk you through a process that we use at Smallbox called human-centered design. Today, we're going to call it student-centered design. It's a 5-step process used to learn deeply from audiences, generate thoughtful insights, design innovative ideas, test solutions for long-term success, and implement with confidence and efficiency. As we walk through each of these phases in the process, we'll be highlighting the key questions meant to be answered during that moment. We'll introduce you to methods specific to that stage, and we'll do a deeper dive into 1 or 2 tools we think will help you in your work. But you don't just have to take our word for it, in the words of Reading Rainbow. This process is implemented by some of the most successful companies around the world. The beauty of it is that it can be scaled for small teams for single people, and it can go as large as a Google or an IBM. So don't be intimidated by these, be inspired by these logos and these companies that use it and have used it effectively for years. Our process begins with the Empathize stage, where we really get to know the audiences that we're serving, thinking of them in terms of quantitative data, yes, but also qualitative data. Traditionally in research, we're taught to go wide and get as many samples as possible, get as many survey results as possible. But for our student-centered process, the goal is to go deep. The number of folks you talk to isn't as critical as developing a better understanding of their expectations, their motivations, their needs. When we have a richer picture of who is using our website, how they are using it, and what their expectations are, we're much, much better able to make decisions that guide our work. So during phase 1, during Empathize, you're really going to be empathizing. You're not just doing research. This is about connecting to people's stories. And you're going to be answering questions like these. Who is our audience, of course? How are things currently working for them? What leads them to seek a solution like a community college? What motivates them to make a decision? And how did they feel prior to and during their website experience? These questions will help you gain insights that are both demographic, but also biographic.
So to answer those types of questions, we can use a variety of methods. The empathy phase is divergent. As Meg pointed out, we're looking to broaden our understanding. So we need tools that will give us information that we can eventually use to converge or focus. So here we have listed some tools that we use during this phase. For the purpose of this workshop, we're going to dive a little deeper into surveys. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the survey process, but it's a set of questions that provide demographic and biographic information, as well as needs, preferences, and motivations. Surveys can help us gain empathy by interacting directly with people visiting the website as well. So we can start with these big questions. What are we curious about? When we're starting to formulate questions for a survey, we can think about what might help us better understand our audience's situation. What assumptions do we have that we would like to challenge or validate? I'm sure whenever you work with an institution for a significant amount of time, you start to assume that you have answers. And a survey is a way to, even if it's just validating that is in fact true, it gives us an opportunity to engage with that audience group and confirm or validate. Those are very big, open questions. So for me, it's helpful to have a framework for getting started. So I think of this in terms of who, what, when, where, how, and why. These aren't rigid in any way. It's just a kind of a prompt to get me started in thinking about what I want to know. So when I'm considering who, I might think about the basic demographics that we already know, but want to go a little bit deeper on. So for instance, we may ask, we probably have some data already about employment status, but we can ask about employment status and then provide some follow-up questions that give us a little bit deeper insight. So for instance, if they answer that they're currently employed full-time, we can ask questions like, how long have you worked at your organization, to understand their relationship to their career and loyalty. We might ask what industry they work for so that we can eventually map or look for patterns between where people work, what types of industries people work in, and what they gravitate toward when they come to our website and consider our programs. If they say that they're currently unemployed, we can ask how long they've been actively looking for employment, or what is your favorite job that you've had and why is it your favorite? Again, that's a big open-ended question for the user to answer, but it can lead to some very interesting direct quotes as we ask them to actually provide a personal response. We also want to ask questions that provide a better understanding of their context, their social structure, and how that might relate to our services. So a couple examples of that we put here are, will you involve anyone else in your decision to enroll or not? If so, who? That could be very compelling data to get. And then do you have friends or family members that have attended community college? This would give us a little bit of a clearer picture of maybe their preloaded perceptions, whether that's positive or negative, based off of how if they're connected with other folks who have gone through this experience. Once we've accumulated a set of questions, we want to assemble those and get those out to our participants. So we want to remember when we're collecting these questions that this needs to be brief. We're asking people to donate their time and energy. We've all interfaced with surveys, I'm sure, at some point, and skipped it or decided to engage based off of our relationship and our investment in helping that organization. So if someone's willing to give us their time, we want to make sure that we're not exploiting that too much. So we think no more than 3 minutes. The closer to 1 minute than 3 minutes is the better. And there's a number of ways that this can be deployed. So once you have your questions and you need to actually get this in front of the participants, at Smallbox we use something called Hotjar because it's a software or a software company that provides a number of elements. That one of those is surveys, and we choose that because it's very intuitive to work with. It's has built-in analytics, and it allows you to select a number of options for where you want the survey to show up. But there are many options for conducting a survey, and some of those are free. Along with that starter kit that Meg mentioned at the beginning, we'll make sure that we include some examples of other survey tools. You'll let your survey run for a predetermined amount of time, usually depending on your timeline. That could either be time-based, or it could be based off of a certain number of results that you want to accumulate before you start assembling or you start synthesizing that data. But you should get something at the very least that resembles a table of data. So this is Hotjar. This is one of the reasons we like working with Hotjar, is this all happens fairly automatically. But like I said, no matter what, with your survey results, you'll have a table of data, and then you can start sorting and filtering based off of responses. You can go through all those open-ended responses, anything where you've asked someone to give a personal response, and read through those and look for interesting sentiments within that. And you'll start to just formulate or group and formulate ideas and synthesis of that the provided data. That'll be especially helpful as you move through the process. So we have, having data is great, but this is about developing a more clear picture eventually of our audiences. So while this raw data might seem like a bunch of numbers and charts, it's going to help us develop empathy as we define a clear picture of who our audiences are. So as a part of that starter kit, we have provided a worksheet for surveys that allows you to, it provides a process that we just walk through of developing survey questions. It also has a lot more examples than what we provided here in this workshop, but that's available on the website for you to download and start creating your own surveys.
So a few things to keep in mind about this stage of the process. The objective, again, is to go deep and not wide, get a really clear understanding of the people, not the numbers. Collecting demographic information is important, but more importantly, it's critical to uncover expectations, motivations, and the experiences of real users. This stage will provide vital information about what's working and what's not working on your site, and move you from assumptions that you've made into real data that you can use yourself or pass along to an external vendor, and they might be able to use it. And those data points can also be used to reveal insights and provide foundation for prioritization, as well as help you make a case for resource allocation internally. Okay, we're moving from empathize to frame. Framing is the next stage, and this is when we take everything we've heard, seen, and read during empathize and start to synthesize, start to put together the insights in order to begin to define our challenges and opportunities. In this phase, we're still not focused on solving the problem. We're focused on understanding the people and the problems. So we're not in the solution space yet. For people like me who want to immediately offer ideas, this phase requires a little bit of restraint, but I promise you the rewards will pay off. At this point, you and your team should be exploring questions like these. Are we seeing trends in who is currently coming to our site? What are those trends? What are some common challenges individuals face, both on our website, but also maybe before they even arrive on our website? Why are these challenges happening? And are there gaps between what we expect and what the users expect of our website? And why is that gap occurring?
So again, as we work through this phase of the problem, the framing problem, or the framing phase, we have a number of tools available to us to help us converge or focus. for now, I want to dig into personas and how that helps us frame and identify and document our audience groups. So personas are fictional characters created based upon research to represent different user types who might use our website. I think of this as character development that's rooted in research. How can we articulate who those characters are and how do we move them forward in their story? Some significant benefits that I've witnessed over the course of my career with using personas is that personas help you maintain focus on your audience. So as you're inundated with tasks and other work that you have to do to maintain and develop a website, it can become really easy to forget about the specific people or the people that are using this. So it helps keep that at the front of your mind. And also it helps you, personas help you prioritize your efforts across your team. You can recognize, which persona you are addressing needs for at that time and prioritize those specific solutions. And then lastly, an important one is that it reduces the impact or the likelihood of self-referential design. This notion that I am the audience or just relying on my own instincts rather than recognizing that I most often am not the audience for the product that I'm providing. So step one, using everything we already know about our audiences, and that may include survey data that we've collected. We look for patterns and develop categories. We want to create groups based on circumstances more than demographics. A group may share details like gender and age, but focusing on those details can be limiting. So again, if you think about this as character development, how can we create characters around common experiences, obstacles, and ambitions? So here's how that might shape up from these different vague groups to groups that we can identify. They should coalesce around common primary motivators like life experiences and context. We don't need a persona for every possible combination of demographic and biographic data points. For this example, we're going to give our persona a name. This is critical because, as you know from I'm sure other experiences in life, like once you give something a name, it becomes a little bit more personal to you. You now have a relationship, you know what to call it. So we want to embody a group or category using a single persona and start by giving it this name. If helpful, you can use these modifiers. Like in this case, we're using kind of shorthand, recareering Rachel, to help us remember as we go through the process. When you use this for a while, eventually you can drop those modifiers, but it's helpful to have a reminder as you go through them.
And those modifiers can be fun because of the alliteration. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. Naming things is fun for sure. So in step 3, we want to then, now that we have a title or a name, we want to briefly describe Rachel's current state and how she feels. So again, this is where maybe survey data, open-ended questions and surveys may prove really valuable. They may provide a very specific direct quote from someone who's going through this type of experience. In this case, for example, she might say, I feel stuck and I don't know what to do next, but I know I need to change. Then we move on to goals and motivations. What are her needs and what led her to recognize these needs? So in this case, she may have reached the ceiling in her career and wants to maybe increase her salary, or maybe she doesn't feel fulfilled. She feels like it's an odd fit for her. And so she wants to pursue something that maybe matches her skills and abilities a little bit more closely. After that, we'll move on to pain points, where we document obstacles that she experiences when engaging with the website or the concept of furthering education through college in general. So we might say things like her time is limited due to her need to maintain her job, and along with the fact that she has young children at home. If she's re-careering, then most likely she's at a certain point in life. This could have been captured as a demographic data point, but we were thinking through like an age or number of children. We're thinking through the experience of that and how that relates to a pain point for Rachel when it comes to further education. So we might also say she isn't sure what career would be best for her or what programs are available. And then lastly, we want to also document what influences Rachel. Where does she get information? How does she make decisions? What websites does she frequent? What social media platforms does she trust and contribute to or utilize? With each of these, you can see you may get to a point where you think, oh, I wish I don't have enough information actually to fill this out, or it's ambiguous. The part of the one of the benefits to this process, this student-centered process, is that we're always trying to move from ambiguity toward clarity. You don't have to have all the answers. Any answers that help you develop a higher fidelity understanding of your audience and what they're experiencing is a positive thing. So you can choose to move forward with the information you have, knowing that eventually you might come back around and challenge some of these ideas that you developed here and continue to enhance and optimize your personas. Then one little side note is that as you've developed personas, or after you've developed personas, you should start to challenge anytime you use the generic term user. It comes up a lot when managing websites, user experience and user testing and all these things where we have this generic term user. And it has some negative connotations broadly, but also we should always consider, it should be a prompt to consider whether or not we have a more specific name that we can use. When we say user, do we actually mean Rachel or do we mean David? And that can help us create more specific solutions based off of real people and real needs. And then finally, as you've documented these personas, place them somewhere visible, propagate them throughout your organization with people who are also needing to interface with these different persona groups. It can help not only you and your work, but your organization as well. And just having them somewhere prominently displayed or somewhere where people will see them on a routine basis will again reinforce, it will help you think about the fact that there are other people on the other end of this with some dimension.
One note, when I was at Butler, we actually had our personas that were up in the space where we had our website meetings. And we would often turn to them and even point to them as we're like, well, Rachel, what will this do for Rachel? How will this help Rachel? Or will this hurt Rachel? And they were presences in the discussions that we were having. They were right there with us, and they became very real for us as a result.
Yeah, that's excellent. When we another tool that we can use during this phase, especially coupled with personas, are insight statements. So this is a fairly simple formula. Insight statements are derived from research and told through the perspective of an individual persona, an explanation of a specific need or desire related to the website. So going along with that kind of story metaphor, we want to take what we know and turn based off of needs and pain points and people and turn those into a narrative-based structure. So again, very simple framework, looks like UX Mad Libs. We have these blanks. We start with a persona and then describe what she needs to do on the website and for what purpose. So in this example, we could say Rachel needs to research financial assistance so that she can determine if she has enough to begin next year. So you'll iterate through all your personas and everything that you've learned so far, and you should come up with a nice, healthy stack of these narrative-based insights. So to help you get started with developing personas, we've created another worksheet. It's part of that starter kit, and it includes step-by-step process and a basic template to get you started in developing your own personas.
So at the end of this stage, you'll have a deeper understanding of the common traits, the motivations, and the priorities that unite your users. You'll have a deeper understanding of the common challenges individuals face, and you'll start to see them as individuals rather than a big fuzzy mix of quantitative data, which is really critical. Okay, we're moving into ideation. This is my favorite stage. This is when you take all the insights and information that you have gathered and organize to date and really begin to develop solutions. This is often where most people start. This is where I started for years and years in my career, is what's the problem, let's solve it. I assumed I knew the problems and could come up with solutions on my own. What I produced were ideas generated from my own biased perspective, and the older I get, the more biased it becomes, and assumptions that weren't grounded deeply enough in the real experiences of those using the site. What resulted were solutions that were reactive, that didn't solve the real problem, that sometimes created new problems, and that ultimately were not sustainable and had to be reconsidered and redone. I cannot stress enough that you need to move through empathize and frame before you get to ideate. So get a really strong understanding of who's on your site and who's using your site. Not only will your proposed solution be grounded in a stronger, more equitable foundation, because it's not just your perspective, it's multiple perspectives, but you'll also have data and information to defend your decisions. I keep mentioning defending your decisions. Maybe you don't have to, but I remember having to do that quite a bit. One final note on ideation stage before we jump into the tools and methods. You'll notice that we haven't shown you a lot of examples of other websites. We did in the very beginning. That's really intentional, because your solution should be built to directly address the problems of your specific users. Without knowing those problems, case studies and those award-winning tools that we see at conferences just add to the chaos. However, now is the stage. So once you get through and you understand who your audiences are, then you can start going around. Then you can start looking for inspiration on other college websites. Before you get into ideation, feel free to poke around to see if other colleges inspire you on both large and small scales. During this phase, you and your team will be answering questions like these. How can we solve common challenges that we're seeing? How can we tailor experiences based on commonalities in our users, based on Rachel, based on Fiona? Should we simplify information to optimize the experience? What's the best way to merge the students' expectations with our priorities and our needs and our challenges? And how might we create the largest impact for all of our students using our limited resources?
So here we have a few ideation methods. We'll explore a couple of these, starting with how might we. This is an exercise that provides a focused way to generate ideas connected to reframing challenges as opportunities. So at this point, we are diverging again. We are coming up with as many ideas as possible. And we're going to start that process by reframing the question in with this beginning phrase, how might we? That opens the door, just that word might, as we address things like how might we feature career paths tied to degrees. So we can start as a group or individually. You can use sticky notes and get a group together and put all your how might we questions up on a board. And have people provide answers as a group exercise. You can also sit at your desk with a pad of paper and go through and write down as many ideas as you can think of. This is essentially a brainstorm from that's based off of all the data that we've created so far, so that we can stay focused on our user groups. But it is a brainstorm, and as we all know, you do not bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. Just write down everything that you can think of, and then we'll go through a process of weeding through those and prioritizing those based off of their what we think will be most successful. So an example of how might we help prospective students map out their courses over multiple semesters, or better yet, how might we provide connect prospective students with programs that match their interests and goals. A bunch of some ideas that you might come up with along that way are restructuring navigation and homepage content, or creating a wizard style tool to walk them through the process. You can make an interactive goal-based menu. You could also just consider the vocabulary you're using on the site, and make sure that it is student focused, both in navigation and in high level headlines. But those are examples of just some ideas that might relate to that problem, and then we'll go through a process where we can filter through those. So that leads us to plotting, which is where we take a broad set of ideas or solutions and prioritize them based off of criteria. So, as we just discussed, we came up with a bunch of ideas that we need to figure out what is actionable, or what is the best use of our resources. And we do that by thinking through the cost in terms of lift, time and energy, and the impact. What is the likely impact that solution is going to have on the stories that we've developed so far? So you may find that some things end up, high impact but high lift, and you might have to weigh, okay, what are our resources right now? Is that something we can tackle now, or is that something we need to address later? You can find things that are low lift and low impact, and maybe that just becomes something that is on a list of things that you address, that more of those short-term solutions or things that you can address as you have time. But somewhere in the middle here, you're going to find a sweet spot of things that are either low lift and high impact, or somewhere more toward the middle between these two axes. And those are things that are likely to be things that you want to dig into and figure out how you can go further in developing those solutions. So using some examples that we brought up earlier, and using this question, how might we connect students with programs that match their interests and goals? You can see how these two colleges approach that, and we can think through all the ideas that we just kind of tossed out as part of the brainstorm with that same question, and start plotting those. So one thing that I didn't mention was potentially adding a live chat or a conversational interface so that people can engage with that and ask questions. Well, that's going to be most likely a technological investment. Could come with some actual financial investment. So that's why it gets up there in that top right corner. But as we talked about as well, low lift and high impact could be just updating your content navigation with vocabulary that resonates with students. So you can see how this starts to help you formulate how you're going to spend your time, how you're going to communicate with your organization about you can share with them how this process was developed, and that you can have higher confidence in that this is where we need to put our time and bring people along for that experience. So another thing that you want to consider, because the web is a unique space, there are facets to creating solutions. As I mentioned, do not bring this umbrella to that brainstorm. However, when we start to think about what's feasible, what we should invest in, we want to also think through all these different categories of concerns when it comes to building and designing and developing a website. So you have things to consider like accessibility, and you have SEO, content and brand, your navigation. These are all different categories that you want to walk through and make sure that the solutions you're coming up with they're going to facilitate your audience to get through what they need to without breaking some of these best practices along the way. So we've created a web audit tool that is a part of that student-centered kit. So it's at least a starting point for how you might challenge the solutions you've come up with some documented best practices and common pitfalls.
So this stage allows us to generate multiple solutions for our challenges. It gives us a backlog of ideas, those ones that may have been too heavy of a lift for now, but when we redesign the website entirely, we might get to. Or when it's an easy fix, let's go ahead and do it. It gives us a backlog of those ideas. It allows us to easily prioritize solutions based on multiple factors, including the impact on your students, but also your budgets, your time, and even the limitations of your team and what they can do technologically, or the technology itself, such as an old CMS. Okay, we're moving right along. We've landed on a great solution, right? We've gotten all the way through, we've prioritized, we've found that solution. Now it's time to make that idea come to life and begin to test it with audiences, another stage that we often forget. This stage will ensure the long-term success of your solution. Gathering feedback in this moment will safeguard against a full investment that isn't proven or that has unintended consequences. And let me tell you about one unintended consequence. I once launched a website that actually started a student protest just because they didn't like the way that they interfaced with it. So had I known this method then, I would have avoided a big, big headache. When you test, it helps you to go into things confidently, to allocate your resources confidently. Changes made before you design and deploy the new content, changes made before you launch it to the student body, will help you save money long term, right? Because you haven't implemented it yet, you haven't done anything with it yet. That's why testing is so optimal, and why ultimately it's an investment that will save you time and energy down the road. So during this stage, you'll be asking questions like these. What does the solution actually look like? Is it a change in content, or is it a new tool or landing page? How does it work with the rest of the site? What do we want the user to do? And what do we want the user to feel, right? Were they successful? Were we successful? Does this solve the problem? And does this create additional unintended problems, which I mentioned one might be a student protest, hopefully not. So at this stage, you're really going to look at all of these tools, and I'll let Eugene walk us through them.
Sure. So at this stage, we want to challenge and validate our solutions. We want to embrace the opportunity to refine our solutions. If they don't go quite according to what we expected, it's better to learn that now. It's actually great to find problems now rather than later. So one of the ways that we can prototype is something that we call a talk aloud test. It's a process of collecting information about usability and overall experience from actual individuals during the design process. So one thing to note is that it can be, a talk aloud test can be conducted remotely or in person. I know we've all gotten used to doing this virtually for the last handful of years, but before all that, we would often sit across a desk from someone and do user tests that way. And there's a number of different ways that you can implement a test. We'll get to those in a moment, but you want to start by considering what it is that you want to learn, and you can start that by going back to your insight statements. If you went through that process, what are those stories that we're trying to push forward, and how can we, at this point, since we're get to engage with real people to test our solutions, how can we actually make some of those stories reality and test to see if they're successful? So, like I said, you want to identify opportunities to learn. So return to those insight statements and find tasks that you'd like to validate through testing. So some ways you might think of that, some lenses you might put on to consider what you want to learn. So what is our level of confidence with the proposed solution and regarding this statement, or how important is this to our site success? And can we test with someone who matches that persona specifically? If so, if you know you have people that you can talk to who match a specific persona, you might want to develop a test that is more that more fully engages with those stories related to that persona. You also have to build a prototype. Now, this, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is, when it comes to prototyping, I know a lot of you folks are working with vendors when it comes to, building a product. So you might need to engage with a vendor to do a prototype, or you might just ask your vendor when they're offering solutions, how they have validated and offer up, prototyping as or a talk aloud test as a way for everyone to get on the same page and ensure that the solutions are appropriate and impactful. But no matter who's making it, we need to create something for the user for the participant to engage with. So it can be simple. At this stage, we are trying to limit our investment. That is critical. It ruins, you don't get the full value of the process if you go and make the whole thing. The point is to only build it to the level at which it needs to be, so that we can test our assumptions or our solutions so far. So here's a quick demonstration of what a wireframe or a prototype often looks like for us. It's wireframing, or a blueprint version of the solution. We're not investing in all the details of visual design, because that's not what we're testing. We're actually testing the experience and whether or not someone can move through or access the tools that they need to perform a task. So here we've created a wireframe for an interactive goal-based drop-down menu. And you can see, and you can recall back to what the higher fidelity version of this looked like. Obviously, it's not the same, but a lot of the details of the layout and, or sorry, not the details, but the basic layout and the information that's presented and how it's accessed is there for the user to actually experience.
One note I'll make is that these prototypes can be, interactive and online. There are tools for that. But as you can see from these two examples, they can also be printouts and that show these pictures. And then you just slide in the next printout. If they say, I'd click there, you just slide this view in. So it can be as basic as that. Yeah,
so this next part about contacting participants, that can happen in parallel with the prototype development or creation. But as I mentioned, if possible, you want to reach out to people that fit within our identified personas, and always offer reciprocal benefit. This not only serves as an incentive, but it also just acknowledges that we appreciate the time and energy that the participants are sharing with us. Once we've sent out emails to folks or phone calls or called folks to start populating a group for testing, we want to go about creating our script. So a script starts by thinking through all the scenarios that we want to test, and you write an actual little story based off of when the user comes, when the participant comes to engage with the usability testing, or the talk aloud test, you want to make sure that that as they engage with each task, we have given them enough context to understand who they are. There's a little bit of role playing that might have to happen. So in this example, a scenario might be, you have a full-time job in sales, but you don't feel particularly successful. Your favorite part of your job is when you can introduce them to a valuable solution they didn't know existed. You believe you would be more satisfied in a career focused on teaching or helping others. You are considering if furthering education would make a career like that possible for you. So that kind of sets the narrative part of what we're engaging with through the test. And then you want to describe the task that you want them to accomplish in one simple sentence. So the correlating example here would be, find career paths related to teaching or helping others that are enabled through community college programs. So you'll iterate through that as many times as you need to. I think through each scenario and resolving each task is roughly 5 minutes. So you can plan accordingly to how much you can fit in. You might write different scripts for different audience groups if you need to shorten it. There are a number of things to consider at that point, but you should create a series of scenarios and tasks. Then as part of your script, you also want to include a repeatable introduction. So at the start of each testing session, you want to help the participant feel at ease. They may not have done this before, so you want to set expectations for the process and remind them that they are not being tested. You want them to feel completely comfortable, and that any issue that comes out is actually a benefit to us as an organization, because it's testing our solutions. It gives us that opportunity to refine and improve. And this is vital, you kindly request that they share their thoughts as they are accomplishing the task. This can feel very unnatural to folks who you don't typically navigate websites and speak your thoughts out loud. Well, most of us probably don't, but that's critical to the success of this type of test. So you have your script developed, and now it's time to build your team. So you need to select a moderator and observer. Technically, this could be done by one person. I often perform user tests by myself, but it becomes a lot easier as you, if you're unfamiliar with the process, it is a huge help to have someone who is focused on engaging with the participant and someone who is documenting as we go along. So that moderator is the person who engaged with the participant, and the observer is capturing all the information as we go through. Just some quick notes for if you have the moderator mindset, then you want to continue to coax the participant to speak their thoughts as they go through. As I said, it can be very unnatural. And they might forget. They might start out doing it, and then after a while, they forget to say those things out loud. And then you want to avoid directing the participant. This is why I often suggest that the person who came up with the solution is not the person who moderates these tests, because you can keep some distance from what you want to happen and just objectively observe. And so if a user gets stuck or a participant gets stuck, this happens often. You've given them a task and they feel like they don't know what to do next. So our instinct as humans is to help because it's, we know the answer, but also they may ask for help. And you want to, rather than provide the direction, you actually just want to give them some open-ended prompts, like, so do you see any other options that might help you complete the task, or things along those lines. Now, if you're in that observation mode, then you want to document the steps the participant took. So what did they click on? What did they hover over? You also want to write down those. So we've asked them to share their thoughts. It's your job as an observer to capture those so that you can reuse those later. Often those are where the deepest insights come from, are the things that people didn't do but mentioned, or the context that they're thinking. They're assessing a menu and they're talking about the other things that they've seen on other websites. Those things can be really valuable to write down. And then you also want to make sure to ask follow-up questions. So once the task is complete, then you can ask them questions like, how complex was this on a scale of 1 to 5? Were there things that you would improve? What did you enjoy? What did you dislike about that, completing that task? So another worksheet that we developed is a worksheet centered around this Talk Aloud test. Again, documenting this process, but also giving you some blank templates for scripts where you can enter in your own tasks and scenarios, as well as some pre-built fields that you might want to capture the details of the test and the participants' actions in.
So a couple of notes about this stage is that we've walked you through a Talk Aloud test. That is one of the methods. That's one of the tools. I think the most important thing to think about as you're going through this process is, how are you going to get this solution in front of the audience that's going to use the solution, right? How do you validate? How do you make sure that you're on the right path? How do you make sure that this is going to solve the problems and not create more problems? So if you can't do Talk Aloud tests, if that feels like too big of a lift for you, socializing the idea, bringing in a group of students, bringing in a group of prospective students, and just talking to them about the idea may be enough to get that information, could be enough to really set you on a path of success without having to do a heavy lift. The other side of it is, if you are working with external vendors, if you have folks who are going to build, as Eugene said, the site for you, ask them to implement this. Ask them to bring this into their process. This isn't something that everybody does as part of a web design and development process, but if you really want to be student-centered, if you really want to make sure that your website is serving the needs of all of your audiences, in particular, your highest priority ones, this is a really critical step in the process. So, some key takeaways at this stage. After you've talked to Rachel and Fiona and David and Ronald, you should have a deeper understanding of the outcomes of the work. You should understand the refinements that you need to implement to improve your idea. You will have an increased likelihood that the implementation will be successful long-term. And that's really critical, because that's going to reduce costs and that's going to reduce time over the life of your website. If you launch things and then immediately have to go back and change them, that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of budget. Some studies show that UX testing can reduce costs by as much as 50% over time, and that it can reduce your time investment as much as 30%. So you're putting a little bit more energy on the front end in this process, but ultimately you're going to reap the benefits on the back end that are huge.
Yeah,
okay.
and one more thing that I would add there is that the after you've launched or implemented your solutions, we will have analytics data to go over, but that's much different information. We lose at this point, or at that launch point, we lose the ability to actually observe and even engage with people who are using our solution. So you can always loop through again and test solutions, but this is a kind of a golden opportunity, and we want to embrace that.
Ooh, one more thought too. If your solution is as basic as changing the tone or the content of the language that you're using, right? This can be as simple as sending out a survey. It can be as simple as putting that new content in front of people and asking them for their reaction to it, asking them if it resonates, asking if it's helpful. And so this again, it runs the gamut of how much effort and time you will put into this, but again, it will reap huge benefits in the end. Okay, so we're at the final stage. And I'm not going to say that implementation is the least important phase of this process. We all know it's not, because this is where the rubber hits the road. But what I will say is that by this time, you hopefully will have very few decisions to make. The process will feel very straightforward, and it may even feel anticlimactic. Whether you are doing the work yourself or you are outsourcing to the vendor, you're going to have all the information you need to bring your solution successfully to life. The big choices have been made. And if you're going to do the work in-house, please be sure to keep those personas and the insight statements, if you do those, close by as reminders. If you're outsourcing the work, be sure to share everything you've done to date with your vendor. And even better, if you have the ability, work with your vendor through the entire process, whether they're leading or you're leading, so that everybody learns alongside each other, and it can be a really collaborative relationship. Beyond doing the work and actually getting this implemented, the biggest questions you'll have in this stage will be how to measure your success after implementation, and how to continue to stay focused on your students and ensure success for them long term. This is the launch of something, right? It's the beginning of something, not the end. So be sure to identify metrics that are both quantitative and qualitative. For instance, I know a lot of you measure success by time on site, and that can be a fantastic indicator of user engagement, showing that they are deeply exploring the content. But It can also indicate that individuals are having a really hard time finding what they need and therefore scrolling around. Regular user interviews or surveys can help you understand the difference. Perhaps look at time on site and survey insights that show students are easily able to find what they need. I saw a lot of you also measure success through application rates, and that's another great key indicator. But understanding how individuals made the decision to apply and what their journey looked like will help you more deeply relate it to your website work, in order to ensure that they are applying because of the website and not despite the website. Instead of application rates, perhaps look at the satisfaction students have with the application process as well. Okay. When you measure success, don't just look at those back-end analytics. Again, as Eugene and I have underscored, find a way to balance the quantitative data with the real experiences of your students ongoing, and revisit the Empathize stage. Revisit this. This is a constant cycle whenever you can, whether it's through surveys, interviews, or conversations with students even. Remember, once you've launched, again, it's just the beginning. By continuing to understand your students and their experiences, you will be able to generate better outcomes for all, while also more efficiently allocating your limited resources. So today we stayed pretty high level, talking about the student-centered design process. On October 26th, Eugene and I will be back here to dive into even more practical applications of this work, including navigating common user experience challenges or student experience challenges, beginning to demystify SEO, and an overview of free tools that can help you better understand free or low cost tools, let's say it that way, that can help you better understand your website, your users' behavior, and measure your results more effectively. If you haven't already registered, head over to the Lumina website for more information. We really look forward to walking you through all of that in the next workshop. For the student-centered starter kit and more community college opportunities, you can go to luminafoundation.org/challenge. On that site, you'll be able to download the survey template, the persona worksheet, the website audit, and the Talk Aloud template from today's workshop. With that, Eugene, I think it's time to take questions. And I know a lot have flowed in as we've been chatting, so let me move over there. Okay. Okay, so our first question is from Stephanie, and Stephanie is curious. She said, we are a small team with very limited time. How do we begin to implement these practices without becoming overwhelmed?
That's an excellent question. And that's actually one of the reasons why we use this type of process. So when you look at the whole process, it may seem like, oh, this is this long thing, but in fact, it's broken up into these different units, and what it allows us to do is prioritize along the way and allocate resources along the way. So I would say that no matter the size of the team, now I also want to acknowledge, like, I'm not in that seat. I don't know what the list of tasks are, but there are things that you can about this process that you can initiate and then go back and maintain some of the work that you need to do on a daily basis. So when we're empathizing, it's really the work is up front to develop questions and to figure out how we're going to, what tools we're going to use to get information. But if it's a survey, we come up with those questions and we launch that survey and let it run for a while. And then we have another another milestone when we've collected enough information, and we dig in deeper there. So, between the fact that the process enables better prioritization and a way to align your team and your organization along the way, that theoretically should help. And I've seen it in practicality. I've seen it help with maintaining a lot of competing priorities and with a small team, but also, we're moving in increments forward. So you don't feel like you need to take it all on at once. It actually isn't daunting, even though it kind of, it might be different or seem like it's a huge rigid process. It's actually quite flexible, and it's able to be divided up and even paused if necessary.
Awesome. If you guys have questions, you can add them into the comments and we'll take those questions and answer them along the way. I don't think we got a lot of questions come in as we were presenting, so I'm not sure we're going to get to everything, but I am going through them as Eugene is actually answering them. I'll also answer some as well. So add your comments in, your questions into the comment section. The other thing I will tell you before we get into more questions is that a recording of this workshop is going to be available on that website. And in addition to that, after we get through the second workshop, we're going to add a frequently asked questions document where we'll go through questions that we received often from this presentation and from the next presentation that you'll be able to reference. Okay. Another question we have, and this one's from Drew. It says, we get content for our website from multiple sources, like departments and faculty members. How do we balance that with this student-centered process? How do we get them into the student-centered process as well? And I will take a first stab at that because I find that the personas are really the best way to do that. After you've gotten that research and showing them the data is really important too, if you want to flex that we've got all of this information. But really socializing those personas and putting those out there to anybody who's giving you content, anybody who's participating in ideating around your website and what it should do and how it should do it, should have those personas and should know that they need to respond to those individuals, those people, right? Even though they're fictional, I think that's right. Even though they're not real, they need to have them in mind as they're writing, as they're thinking through things, in order to not think of the audience as that fuzzy group again, but be more specific in the way that they're aligned around it. Eugene, anything to add?
Yeah, so in addition to, equipping other folks in your organization with tools to help them, point in the right direction. Since this process should give you opportunities to demonstrate to people how you've made decisions about like what you're going to prioritize and what you're not going to prioritize. I know that with while I have not ever worked at a college in-house, as an agency, as a member of an agency, I worked with several higher education organizations, and I know that there's a lot of political components to where content, whose content shows up where, and that is a challenge. That's a unique challenge, I feel like, to bureaucracies that have a lot of different units. So in addition to giving them those tools, you can also show them, this is why the homepage is structured this way. It's not a personal slight against your perspective, but more so, this is rooted in data on who we're trying to speak to and how they process things. And if you've done Talk Aloud testing or anything like that, you can demonstrate perhaps like this language resonated with the audience, and that's why we are prioritizing these highest level statements, and then moving people toward that, maybe the content the in this fictional situation that person might be concerned about.
Yeah, hopefully people in academics can appreciate the research, the aspect of it, and ideas and solutions that are based in that. That seems to align with a lot of how faculty members approach it. So if we can provide that sort of structure to our approach to our work, it may help better align with faculty and departments as well. Okay. Another question we had, and this is, we got a couple of these, and I do want to, do we suggest incentivizing people to take a survey? And I would say yes, if you can. And there are many different ways to do this. There can be ways that you can enter them into a contest. These vary by state, I will say, so that's a little bit tricky. You might have to look at state laws to whether you can enter people into contests for things, but you can enter anybody who participates in the survey into a contest to win something. You can incentivize students on campus or prospective students with, if you submit the survey with your email address, we can provide you with a $5 gift card. That can get expensive, so know that. You know, but what I will say is if you keep that survey short, if you keep it less than 3 minutes, even closer to that 1 minute mark, then the burden to the student isn't that great, and it's not going to be that big of a deal, or the prospective student, it's not going to be that big of a deal for them to take it. And if you pose it as, we are trying to help you, please help us in doing so, it actually adds to their desire to be a part of it.
Yeah, and you know, you can run tests for, you can change the duration that you want to run a test if you're not getting enough results without offering incentive. Again, I agree with Meg. If you can offer incentive, please do. But if you keep it short, and people will engage with it, but it might be at a slower rate. It depends. There's a lot of variables that go into that. But another thing about the incentive is, you know, in other organizations I've worked with, it's proven beneficial to start to develop kind of cohorts that will help you along the way. So in response to a survey could be the starting point of actual engagement over time with an individual to participate in testing or other things like that, in which case more incentive can be offered along the way. People who participate in testing is usually, you have more control over that than you do with who responds to a survey, in which case you might change the incentive model there. But if you can give them some indication that this is an opportunity for dialogue and a relationship that could be appealing to folks.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The survey is not as critical for incentivizing people or to compensating people, but when you get into user testing, in order to make it equitable, and that's really critical
Right.
for our processes, and I would imagine for community colleges as well, in order to make it inclusive and equitable, you need to honor people's time and their expertise by compensating them for it. Mm-hmm. Okay. At what stage do you consider 508 and Wcag requirements or accessibility requirements?
I mean, it shows up the most when we come into ideation. That's when we start to think through, here are potential solutions to the problem, but what? And that's why we shared why we shared the audit at that point in the presentation. Your solutions need to be challenged with, well, what accessibility concerns does this present if we go down this route, and do we have the capabilities to either overcome those or make this as accessible as it needs to be, or is that a barrier and we should actually move on to something else for now because that is a critical barrier. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. One thing I will say about accessibility is that there are moments where you need to go back and remind yourself as you're going through. It needs to be top of mind always, right? But if you put into your processes with your web team, with whoever's in your marketing team or IT team, that on an annual basis, you will go through and do an accessibility audit, that's going to help you really stay on top of it and make sure that you are meeting all the requirements and exceeding the requirements that you are legally bound to keep.
Yeah, I think exceeding is, a good way to put that. So there's a difference between passing an audit and the experience that one has when they need to use the website using alternative means. So I've had to learn throughout my career that's it becomes a little bit more difficult to see, but it's if you're truly invested in accessibility beyond just making sure that you don't face any kind of litigation, and you're actually invested in whether or not someone can use your website that would need to, would have mobility challenges or visual impairments or anything like that, then it's helpful to go even further and observe, if possible, what that's actually like for someone. There are tools that can help you do that as well. It's evolved a lot technologically. We've evolved a lot in what we can do through design and development tools and auditing, to get it closer to something that resembles a valuable experience. But when you've sat in a room with someone who cannot see and observe how they use your website, sometimes it can be a humbling experience. So we don't have to get into all of that right now. This is an accessibility seminar, but we can talk about it more potentially in that other workshop.
Yeah.
And but personally, I will just say, I think if we all move more toward that, what is it like to experience this mindset, I think we'd all be better off.
I'm going to add one more note to that, and this is from thinking from the business perspective rather than from the empathy perspective, which I think is important to balance both of them, though empathy in my mind is more important. But the business perspective of this is SEO is so aligned with accessibility now that if you improve the accessibility of your site, if you exceed the standards for accessibility, your SEO is going to improve as well. It's just they're like this. And I know a lot of people don't understand SEO. It is still kind of fuzzy for me, and I've been in the space for a while. But simple things can make big differences, and accessibility is one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just kind of a coincidence, really, that how search engines develop their, how they index content is they have these bots, and these bots don't have hands or eyes or anything like that. So when we develop solutions for SEO, they often solve accessibility problems and vice versa, because we have to create something that can be navigated without being able to see, or navigated without being able to have full mobility.
Okay, I've got another question, and this one's from an anonymous source, but is there a significant benefit to creating personas for specific experiences that students might go through when considering an institution? Or would it be more beneficial to create more general personas for new, returning, veterans, dual enrollment students first, in order to lay a framework for what the types of students, for what the main types of students are experiencing? So do you start, and this actually, I will say, somebody else had a question that I just saw about, do you start with the experience or do you start with the user? How do you go into this? So is it task-based or is it audience and experience-based, I guess, like prior to?
Sure. So I mean, I think some of it may depend on your organization. And I think when it comes to community colleges, you probably do have some built-in like expectations for who is coming and what categories they might fit into in terms of like certain I don't know, like, yes, you probably do have a certain amount of like veterans or something like that is a way to start developing a persona. I would say yeah, I don't know how to answer that right away. I feel like both could be valuable in different situations, and I think the process of empathizing can go through either door.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. I think both are valid options. It depends on what you're seeing, what trends you're seeing, what experiences you're seeing that are bringing people together. And it doesn't matter where the sort of groupings are, as long as you do find those groupings and those commonalities and those. I think one of the biggest things that we would suggest to prioritizing people are, what are the common sort of challenges that they're bringing into this decision that they're making, right?
All right. I mean, you could find that across those different like types, they actually share more challenges or opportunities, so that like those labels become less important and the experience becomes more important, because it's really whether you fit into this category or this category, you're a veteran or you're a a returning student. You may find that there's actually more overlap in their motivations and obstacles, and if that's the case, then that's probably the way you want to look at it, is let's group them around those types of things, and we'll actually solve problems for everyone. One anecdote that comes to mind for me is the there's a brand of kitchen tools called OXO, and they have these big rubbery like handles on them, and that was developed because they were solving a problem for people with motor issues. Like they didn't have full use of their fingers, but it turns out that everyone likes that. Everyone prefers to have tools that they can easily grasp. So what I'm saying is you might find things that solve a problem for this group actually are meeting a need that is broader than just that category.
So this is somewhat related, and this question's from Teresa. For a long time, there was a trend in task-based navigation. Are you seeing more of an audience and task-based navigational pathway, or more of an audience-based pathway? So is it task-based? Is it audience and task-based? Is it audience-based? And are there trends? I don't know if I'm seeing trends necessarily. There was a time period where a lot of websites were asking you, like, are you a student? Are you a parent? Are you a community member? And I have actually seen that sort of trend fall off a little bit. And instead it's addressing more overarching themes. Again, going back to what Eugene was saying, is that what's unifying about all of these. Now, at some point, you're going to have to prioritize audiences for your website. You can't be all things to all people, or you're nothing to anybody. But knowing that students are the core, starting with kind of thinking about navigation from a student perspective first, and then task from there.
Yeah, I would definitely caution against being too audience specific in how you structure your content for a number of reasons. One, there's an assumption that I as someone visiting a site fit neatly into a category and know what I'm there to do. And sometimes that can be the case. Sometimes it can be very simple like that, but it doesn't always bear out like that you can actually execute that for the breadth that you need to actually serve each type of audience. These audiences tend to share the need to do certain things. So that's why I would think that as far as like primary navigation, you want to think more about like, how can we facilitate all the things that need to happen and access to the content broadly. And this is where I think navigation is one thing, but then the how you reach out to your to folks becomes a factor. Like outside of your website, are there ways in which you engage with different audience types that allows them to jump into the website at a different point where you can have more curated or personalized content? And your navigation does not need to carry the full weight of everything on your website. It obviously is vital, it's worth getting it right, but you also can address things in content that provide alternate pathways. When you look at the information architecture for a website, it's actually everything has its place. But when you experience a website, there's a lot of different ways to get to those places. So I wouldn't stress too much about having to choose one or the other, but getting your main navigation and testing that with your students and potential students, that's a great thing to prototype and iterate on.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and then we'll give some final notes. When doing research, how do you know the demographic info for prospective students visiting the site as opposed to current students and employees? And I'll answer that, and Eugene, you might have a different approach to this, but having a survey tool that has a little bit of logic and initiating with, what did you come to the site to do today? Or are you a prospective student, current student, faculty member, and having themselves and give us a little bit more of then give us age information. So making sure that we get a little bit more of that collective information in order to determine what group they belong in, and how the demographics relate to that.
Yeah, I think that would be important to how you structure that survey. You do want to ask certain questions so that knowing how you're going to filter these eventually. Yeah. Like some of that is strategic, and asking if you are a current student or prospective student would be helpful in sorting through that data later. Okay.
That's it for Q&A this time, but we will have many more opportunities to answer questions in our next workshop on October 26th. Please go to luminafoundation.org/challenge to get that starter kit and access all of those tools that we've talked about, and also to register for the next workshop, and then down the road to get even more tools as we build it out over time. With that, I just want to thank everybody so much for attending. We really, really appreciate it. It's been a joy to be with you today. Hope it helps.